In the silence of the pre-Christmas night, as the world prepared for the holiday, a tragedy struck a cozy home on Covina Avenue in Modesto, California, shaking the entire nation. Laci Peterson, a happy, expectant mother, vanished without a trace, leaving behind only memories and countless questions. Her husband, Scott Peterson, appeared devastated by grief as he desperately tried to find her. What began as a touching story of a missing wife quickly turned into one of the most sensational criminal trials in U.S. history. Many years have passed since then, but every mention of the Laci Peterson case still stirs up a storm of emotions and debates. What really happened on that fateful day? Who was the real culprit? And why did this case attract so much public attention? Laci was 8 months pregnant when she disappeared on December 24, 2002. Her family and friends remembered her as a lively and caring woman, full of life and plans for the future. On the day of her disappearance, Scott claimed he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina, leaving Laci at home doing daily chores. But when he returned, she was nowhere to be found. Laci's disappearance immediately alarmed her loved ones, and soon the case gained national attention. The police quickly focused their attention on Scott. During the investigation, it was revealed that he had an affair with another woman, opening the door to numerous theories and suspicions. Laci's friends and relatives couldn't believe Scott was capable of such a thing, but the facts spoke for themselves. In April 2003, several months after Laci's disappearance, her body and the body of their unborn son were found on the shore of San Francisco Bay, not far from where Scott claimed to have been fishing. Scott Peterson's trial began in June 2004 and lasted nearly 5 months. The prosecution presented 174 witnesses and a multitude of evidence, striving to prove that Scott had murdered Laci and their unborn son to start a new life with his mistress. The defense argued that the evidence against Scott was circumstantial and that the real killer could be someone else. Despite the defense's efforts, on November 12, 2004, Scott Peterson was found guilty of first-degree murder of his wife and second-degree murder of their unborn child. He was sentenced to death. However, in 2020, the California Supreme Court overturned the death sentence while upholding the conviction. The story of Laci Peterson and the trial of Scott remains one of the most discussed and controversial cases in modern American history. In this video, we will take a detailed look at what exactly happened, what evidence was presented, and why this case still sparks so much debate. Christmas 2002 in Modesto was far from ordinary. Laci Peterson had disappeared, leaving her husband Scott at the center of police and public attention. From the beginning, the police focused on Scott, who claimed he went fishing at the Berkeley Marina on the morning of December 24th, leaving Laci at home. Witnesses recalled seeing the family dog Mackenzie wandering the neighborhood with a muddy leash that morning. Neighbors returned the dog to the yard but noticed nothing unusual. When police arrived at the Peterson home, they found Laci's purse, keys, and sunglasses inside, indicating she hadn't planned to be gone long. Scott returned home and called his mother-in-law to report Laci missing. Within hours, a massive investigation began. As the case developed, it gained significant attention. Volunteers from different cities across the U.S. joined in the search for Laci. Posters with her image and information about her disappearance were prominently displayed, circulated on social media, and broadcast on television. Police meticulously checked all possible routes Laci could have taken, but no traces of her were found. At first glance, Scott Peterson seemed like a concerned and helpless husband. However, shocking facts emerged during the investigation. Scott was having an affair with another woman, Amber Frey, of which Laci was unaware. Upon learning of Laci's disappearance, Amber immediately contacted the police and agreed to cooperate with the investigation. Her testimony became crucial in establishing Scott's motives. Investigators also noted some oddities in Scott's behavior. On the day Laci disappeared, he washed his clothes and took a shower, which seemed strange to many who knew his habits. Items found in his car, including maps and camping gear, raised suspicions of a possible escape attempt. The purchase of a small boat shortly before Laci's disappearance drew significant attention. Prosecutors claimed Scott used the boat to dispose of Laci and their unborn child's bodies in San Francisco Bay. A key piece of evidence was his failure to mention his fishing trip in his initial statements, which aroused investigators' suspicions. Scott also began to exhibit strange behavior following Laci's disappearance. He avoided participating in public searches and rarely spoke to the media. Additionally, he showed little emotional response to the situation, which drew the attention of both the public and investigators. Witness testimony played a crucial role in the investigation. Neighbor Karen Service recalled finding Mackenzie wandering the neighborhood around 10:18 a.m. and returning the dog to the Peterson yard. However, the testimony of mailman Russell Grebiel, who claimed to have delivered mail to the Peterson home between 10:35 and 10:50 a.m., contradicted Karen's version. Grebiel stated that the dog did not bark at him, which could suggest Laci was alive at that time. These contradictions formed the basis of Scott's defense, which argued that Laci could have been abducted and killed by someone else after Scott had left for his fishing trip. They also claimed that Scott was busy at work and could not physically have been involved in the crime. During the investigation, it was revealed that Scott was experiencing serious financial difficulties. The couple owned a bar in San Luis Obispo, which they sold before moving to Modesto. Scott worked for a trading company, but his income didn't cover all the family's expenses, especially with the impending costs of a child. Additionally, his affair with Amber Frey added pressure to their marriage, and prosecutors argued that he might have wanted to rid himself of family obligations to start a new life with his mistress. Evidence also showed that Scott called Amber on the day of Laci's disappearance, using a code name, suggesting his intent to hide his true life from his mistress. In April 2003, months after her disappearance, Laci and her unborn son's bodies were found on the shore of San Francisco Bay, near where Scott claimed to have been fishing on the day Laci disappeared. This discovery was a turning point in the case and led to Scott's arrest on charges of double murder. The bodies were badly decomposed, but pathologists were able to determine they belonged to Laci and her son. This finding caused a major media frenzy, and public opinion began to lean towards Scott's guilt. Scott was arrested on April 18, 2003, the day Laci and her unborn son's bodies were officially identified. He was apprehended near the Mexican border, and his car contained a large sum of cash, several cell phones, maps, and documents. This raised suspicions that he was planning to flee the country, further strengthening the case against him. Scott Peterson's trial began in June 2004. The prosecution presented a wealth of evidence and witnesses to show that Scott had planned and committed the murder of his wife and child. Over 19 weeks, the court heard from 174 witnesses and reviewed hundreds of pieces of evidence. Prosecutors focused on Scott's financial problems, infidelity, and desire to start a new life with Amber Frey. Numerous pieces of evidence were presented at trial, including recordings of phone conversations where Scott told Amber he was already a widower. These recordings had a strong impact on the jury, as they showed that Scott considered his wife dead before her body was found. Surveillance footage showing Scott purchasing the boat, which prosecutors claimed was used to dispose of the bodies, was also presented. The defense tried to show that all the evidence against Scott was circumstantial. They pointed out the lack of direct evidence and the absence of a murder weapon. Mark Garagos, Scott's attorney, argued that Laci could have been abducted and killed by unknown persons who then framed Scott, knowing his alibi from the news. Medical examinations played a significant role in the trial. Pathologists established that Laci and her son died of asphyxiation, but the exact time of death could not be determined due to the degree of decomposition. This allowed the defense to build their arguments on the uncertainty of the time of death, suggesting she could have died at any time while Scott was fishing. The cause of death was also questioned. Although it was determined that Laci died from asphyxiation, no murder weapon was found. This circumstance was used by the defense to argue that the evidence was insufficient for a conviction. Prosecutors emphasized the inconsistencies in Scott's statements and his suspicious behavior after Laci's disappearance. They argued that his coldness and lack of interest in searching for his wife indicated his guilt. They also noted that Scott sold Laci's car and tried to sell their house shortly after her disappearance, suggesting his intention to sever all ties with his past life. Amber Frey's testimony was one of the most compelling for the jury. She recounted how Scott had told her he was not married and that his wife had died. Recordings of their conversations, made after Laci's disappearance, where Scott expressed his intention to start a new life with Amber, became key pieces of evidence for the prosecution. These recordings showed that Scott lied and manipulated facts to cover up his actions. Amber also provided photos and gifts that Scott had given her during their affair. further strengthening the prosecution's arguments, showing that Scott was willing to leave his family for a new life. Despite the defense's efforts, the jury found Scott Peterson guilty of first-degree murder of his wife and second-degree murder of their unborn child. On November 12, 2004, Scott was sentenced to death. The trial's conclusion sparked a wave of emotions from the public. Some considered the verdict fair, while others expressed doubts about the investigation and trial's fairness. After the verdict, Scott was sent to San Quentin State Prison to await his death sentence. However, his lawyers continued to fight for a retrial, citing numerous errors during the investigation and trial. In 2020, the California court overturned Scott's death sentence, citing errors in the jury selection process, but upheld the murder conviction. Scott continues to file appeals and seek a new trial. His lawyers claim that new evidence could change the case outcome, but so far, all attempts have been unsuccessful. The Scott and Laci Peterson case generated immense public attention. The media extensively covered every stage of the investigation and trial, sparking intense debates about the media's role in criminal cases. Public opinion was divided. Some believed Scott was guilty, while others believed in his innocence, considering him a victim of media persecution. The prosecution used the media to bolster their case, regularly providing updates and making statements that shaped public opinion about Scott's guilt. Meanwhile, the defense argued that excessive media attention could have influenced the jury's objectivity and the entire trial process. The media also played a role in shaping public opinion about the fairness of the death penalty. The Laci Peterson case exemplified how media coverage could impact public perception and spark debates about the moral and ethical aspects of criminal justice. The Laci Peterson case left a profound impact on American culture and the justice system. It highlighted the importance of thorough and impartial investigations, as well as the need for careful jury selection to ensure a fair trial. Additionally, it became a symbol of the fight for the rights of victims and their families, reminding us that every case requires meticulous and just consideration. This trial also stimulated public discussions about the death penalty, the media's role in judicial processes, and the need for reforms in the justice system. It set a precedent for future cases, demonstrating how crucial it is to consider all aspects and details of each case to achieve justice. Beyond the legal and public consequences, the Laci Peterson case remains a deeply personal tragedy for her family and friends. They lost a beloved person and faced the horrifying reality of her death. The public also deeply felt this tragedy, reflected in numerous memorial events and support for Laci's family. Laci's family continues to fight for her memory and justice, participating in public events and supporting initiatives to protect victims of violence. Their efforts aim to ensure that Laci's tragedy is not forgotten and that her story serves as a reminder of the need to protect the most vulnerable members of society. They also actively participate in charity events, organize memorials, and conduct awareness campaigns about domestic violence and its consequences. This has become their mission to help other families affected by violence and fight for justice. The story of Laci and Scott Peterson has been adapted into films and literature multiple times. Documentaries, books, and TV series dedicated to this case continue to attract the attention of viewers and readers. These works not only tell the story of the case, but also raise important questions about justice, morality, and human relationships. The media resonance of this case also served as a lesson for journalists and media companies, showing how powerful coverage can influence the course of a trial and the fate of individuals. As a result, many media organizations have reconsidered their approaches to covering such cases, striving to balance the public's right to information with the defendant's rights to a fair trial. Many renowned authors and directors have incorporated elements of this case into their works to highlight the importance of fair justice and show the tragic consequences of errors in the judicial system. It has become not only part of American culture, but also a global symbol of the fight for justice. The Laci Peterson case remains an important lesson for future generations of lawyers, journalists, and society as a whole. It reminds us of the need for thorough investigations, impartial trials, and respect for the rights of all participants in the process. This case also emphasizes the importance of public oversight and participation in the legal system to ensure justice and protect the rights of all citizens. For Laci's family and friends, her tragedy remains an enduring pain but also a motivation to fight for justice. Their efforts to commemorate her memory and protect the rights of victims of violence continue to inspire many people to actively participate in public life and human rights activities. This case also showed how important transparency and openness in judicial processes are for ensuring public trust in justice. It became an example of how mistakes and shortcomings in the system can lead to tragic consequences, highlighting the need for continuous improvement in the legal system. The case of Laci and Scott Peterson drew attention to issues of the death penalty and the role of public opinion in judicial processes. The question of justice and impartiality in conditions of intense media coverage became a topic of discussion among lawyers and the public. Many questioned whether a fair trial was possible when every step of the investigation and trial was under close media scrutiny. This case also raised questions about the need to reform the justice system to avoid similar situations in the future. Several measures were proposed to strengthen the protection of defendants' rights and ensure a fairer trial, including limiting the media's role in covering ongoing trials and improving jury selection procedures. Reforms also include better training and education for law enforcement officers and judges to more effectively and fairly handle complex cases. This has been an important step towards ensuring justice for all participants in judicial processes and increasing public trust in the justice system. The Laci Peterson case became not only an example of a complex and controversial trial, but also sparked widespread discussions about the media's role, justice in the legal system, and the protection of victims' rights. Scott Peterson's conviction demonstrated how thorough investigations and judicial processes must be conducted to avoid mistakes and ensure justice. After the verdict, the lives of all participants in this case changed drastically. Laci's family continued to fight for her memory, actively participating in public life and supporting victims of violence. Scott Peterson, despite the overturning of his death sentence, remains in prison, and his case continues to provoke discussions in legal circles and among the public. This case highlights the importance of systemic changes in the legal system to prevent similar tragedies from happening again. Public and human rights organizations use the lessons of this case to develop new approaches to investigation and judicial processes, aiming to improve fairness and protect the rights of all participants in the process. The Laci Peterson case left a deep imprint on people's hearts, reminding us of the necessity to protect the most vulnerable and ensure justice for all. It shows that the fight for justice never ends and requires constant effort and attention from society and the legal system. We must remember Laci and continue to work towards improving our justice system. It is important that each of us contributes to creating a fairer and safer society where the rights and lives of every person are protected. If this story has touched you, subscribe to our channel to not miss new episodes. Like and share this video to spread awareness about the Laci Peterson case and the importance of justice.